Hello everyone, welcome to another fantastic stream. This is stream number 22, and the goal is to build a whole full backend using this tool called FastAPI, and this journey has begun from a long time. Today I'll be looking at dependencies, and I'll be trying to finish all this if possible, as long as my brain allows me and if I don't get tired. And yeah, you all know I began from Python into types, concurrency, async await, and now I'm into this tutorial guide. We have looked at a number of topics, all the way from the first steps, path parameters, query parameters, request body, all through to all this. And now I'm looking at now dependencies, and before you know it, we'll go into security and yeah, so on and so forth. And I can't wait to study security and to study SQL databases, background tasks, and so on and so forth. So now let me start today's study. Says classes as dependencies. They're saying before diving deeper into the dependency injection system, let's upgrade the previous example. So that's what that's what I studied yesterday. Okay, and of course, if you were with me in that stream, most likely you saw that. So going ahead, they say a dict from the previous example. So they're saying in the previous example, we were returning a dict from our dependency or dependable, okay? Which is this. So dependable was this function called common parameters, and this is the dictionary which was being returned, okay? And it has exactly the values in these function parameters, which is the q, the skip, and the limit. And of course, we know what all this is all about, okay? It's Python 3.10, annotated being imported, then depends, and FastAPI also being imported. Then when I scroll slightly, we have the same function parameters like we had yesterday. But the main point they're saying here, we're returning a dictionary, okay? That's what they want us to know for now. Remind about yesterday's stuff. So let me continue. Okay, and of course they gave people who have other versions and variants. Okay, you can look at this. Okay, Python 3.9, 3.8, but what changes simply is using something like union. Okay, the rest is the same, but yeah, we had this yesterday. So they're saying, but then a dict in the parameter commons of the path operation. They're saying, but then we get a dict in the parameter commons of the path operation function here. Okay, this parameter. That's what we get, and that's correct. Okay, we get a dictionary. Why a dictionary? Because of this. Okay, this return type. So let's say then we get a dict in the parameter commons of the path operation function. Okay, this is for this one and also here. Okay, and they're saying, and we know that the editors can't provide a lot of support like completion for dicts because they can't know their keys and value types. This is true. Okay, editors will not know, okay, what the keys and values, okay? So they will not be able to tell you that maybe the keys are maybe strings and the values are integers and floats and decimals and stuff like that. So they're saying we can do better. Okay, so let us see what that better way is. So here you're saying what makes a dependency. Up to now, you have seen dependencies declared as functions. But that's not the only way to declare dependencies, although it would probably be the more common. A key factor is that a dependency should be a callable. Okay, so a callable, I'm guessing something that can be called like a function. Okay, so they're saying a callable in Python is anything that Python can call like a function. Okay, and I just said that. So if you have an object, something that might not be a function, and you can call it. So calling simply also means executing like this, okay? Or like this, something, some argument, some keyword argument equals to 4, okay? Then it is a callable. Something you can execute this way or this way is a callable in Python. And then they go on to say classes as dependencies. you might notice that to create an instance of a Python class, you use the same syntax, okay? So we're saying, for example, if you have a class called cat, and cat has an init method, okay? And we know that, of course, it will take self as the first argument. And then we have a name, which is a string, and they're saying self.name equals to name, okay? So it's a Fluffy cat, name equals to Mr. Fluffy. So they're saying in this case, Fluffy is an instance of the class cat. Yeah, this is basic OOP, okay? So they're saying to create Fluffy, you are calling cat, okay? Calling the cat class. So they're saying, so a Python class is also a callable, okay? Yeah, so a Python class is a callable, just like in this example. For us to get Fluffy, we had to call cat, and cat is a Python class. So you're saying then in FastAPI, you could use a Python class as a dependency, because a callable can be a Python class. And in this case, a Python class is also a dependency. So a class can be a dependency, meaning we can pass, I'm guessing that means we can pass a class, for example, this depends, okay? We can put here a class. So let's go on. I could be wrong. Let's see what they say. So they're saying what FastAPI actually checks is that it is a callable, a function, a class, or anything else, and the parameters defined. If you pass a callable as a dependency in FastAPI, it will analyze the parameters for that callable and process them in the same way as the parameters for a path operation function, including sub-dependencies. Okay, that's good to know. So they're saying that also applies to callables with no parameters at all, the same as it would be for path operation functions with no parameters. Okay, so ideally how they call a path operation function, which we have been studying about since the very beginning, is the same way, the same thing would apply to a callable. Okay, and then they're saying we can change the dependency, dependable, okay, common parameters from the above to the class common query params. Okay, why? Because the class is also a callable, just like how they explained here what we went through. So when you see that this is Python 3.10, okay, the import annotated from typing, the import depends, and FastAPI, create an instance of FastAPI, and of course we studied about depends yesterday. So again, yeah, if you're watching this for the first time, you might need to watch yesterday's stream. Then they're saying fake items db equals to, this is a list, okay, of dictionaries where every key is called item name, okay, and every value is a string. So we have foo, bar, and bars. So this is the class, which now you can see they've highlighted it. This is like the point of interest. So they're saying we can change the dependency or the dependable common parameters from above to the class common query. Okay, the common parameters was defined up here. Okay, so you see the function is here and it was passed as an argument to depends twice, right here and also here. Okay, so we can replace these common parameters with actually a class, because we have discovered the class is also a callable, and this class is the common query params. Okay, so yeah, if you look at this, depends common query params. Okay, and the class simply has an init method, okay, with the same parameters, the queue, skip, and limit, whereby the queue is optional because of none, but it can take a string or none. The skip has a default value of 0, which is an integer. Limit has a default value of 100. Okay, and simply they say self.queue equals to queue, self.skip equals to skip, self.limit equals to limit. And of course, we know what self is. That's the instance or the current object. Okay, so here we see the path operation decorator, the path operation function called commons, okay, annotated with the type common query params, but with a dependency common query params, okay, which is the name of the class, which is also a callable, okay. So this is how you put a dependency. And then we have an empty dictionary. If commons.q, then they update the response with q. Otherwise, they get fake items DB and they skip a number of columns, okay? Using commons.skip and commons.limit. Then they update and return the response. But it's not the point, okay? The point of this is not to first understand this, okay? But to understand that we can have the same implementation, this, okay? So if I can just copy this and I paste it here, okay? Then, so that they are side by side. I just want to share with you my understanding, how I've understood it. And of course, if I don't understand it well, you'll correct me. Feel free to let me know in the chat. So yeah, and let me know how is. I hope you're enjoying the learning, just like I'm doing. So look at this, okay? This function has a queue, okay, with the same constraints and default value, the same as this one, okay? You see, skip int in the in it and in this function, okay? Same thing for limit in the function and this in the class. Basically the same thing, okay? And here they are returning a dictionary. Here they're still just giving values to the instance. As simple as that, okay? But remember, they told us with this kind of definition, it is not easy for the editor to help us in things like checking the types and giving us relevant warnings, okay? So common parameters is a callable, common query params is also a callable. That's why we can give them to this function called depends. All right, let's continue. So it's saying pay attention to the init method used to create the instance of the class. And I've just been explaining that, okay? So for those having other versions of Python, you can look at this, okay? But simply change of syntax, but same concept, okay? So I've already explained to you this, okay? The init method. Let's continue. The rest are the same. So the point of interest is what they highlight, okay? This point of interest is this. And I've already explained to you this and I understand it. So they're saying it has the same parameters as our previous common parameters. And I just showed you that right here, okay? Then we have Python 3.10 here. And yeah, they're just showing us that this, okay, the parameters here in this line that has been highlighted is the same as this, okay? And I've just been showing you that in VS Code, okay? So we can scroll to the next step. So they're saying those parameters are what FastAPI will use to solve the dependency. In both cases, it will have an optional queue parameter that is a string, a skip query parameter that is an integer with a default value of 0, a limit query parameter that is an integer with a default value of 100. And I've just been explaining to you what that's like right here. Then after that, they're saying in both cases, the data will be converted, validated, documented on the OpenAPI schema, among others. Okay, so you're saying using it, they're saying now you can declare your dependency using this class. So if I scroll, okay, this is it. Okay, what I just actually I already went through this. Okay, you pass the name of the class to depends. Okay, so depends becomes the metadata that you pass to annotated. Okay, you have to take note of that. So yeah, this is pretty basic. I'm not sure if I need to redo this. Okay, so what they have is this, an async. Okay, async. Sometimes when I have autocomplete and whatever, and AI, it kind of disturbs. Async def, what's the name of the function? Okay, I want to use, they're calling it read items. Okay, read underscore items. Okay, like that. Full colon. For now, I can return nothing. Then let's say app. Okay, at app dot get. Okay, slash items. Okay, as simple as that. Then here we can say common, okay, will be annotated. Okay, we have to use annotated like that. Then square brackets. Then we put the type. The type is common query params. Okay, notice that we can use still this to set the type. just like they also did here. Okay. Then after that, we put comma, the metadata, and this time we're using depends. Okay. So depends is a function which helps us to add metadata to our metadata for our parameter. Okay, common. Just like we can use query, path, cookie, okay, header. So depends just one of them. Okay, and here I need now to pass the dependency or the dependable, which is the common query params. So in this case, common query params is being used as the type, but also as a dependency. And FastAPI will look at each of these arguments here, queue, skip, and limit, okay, and passing the right information, okay. Yeah, but notice that we can use this common query params class, or we can use this function, okay, like this. Both of them work. But remember, the disadvantage they told us is that we need the class. This one here will not give us good editor support. Okay, so Gwei is having other versions and variants. Yeah, you can look at this, but remember, like I've always told you, I'm working with Python 3.10, so I'll stick with the other one. And this is simply change of syntax slightly, okay, but the concept is the same. So they're saying FastAPI calls the common query params class, okay, and we already know that because it's callable. And they're saying this creates an instance of that class, and the instance will be passed as the parameter. This creates an instance of that class, and the instance will be passed as the parameter commons to your function. Okay, good. So they're saying type annotation versus depends. They're saying notice how we write common query params twice in the above code. Yeah, and I already highlighted that. Okay, I highlighted that. So saying in Python 3.8, it looks something like this, which is essentially what we have. In Python 3.8 plus annotated, they're saying please prefer to use annotated version if possible. Okay, you can simply do this. Okay, common query params goes to depends. Okay, you can do that, meaning if I came here, okay, if I redefine this function, okay, just to make sure you guys also remember what we studied earlier. Okay, I can simply say come here and say the type, okay, is common query params, okay, and will be equals to depends. You can see even AI has already suggested the right thing, okay. Common, then we pass the dependency, common query params. This also works, okay. But remember the advantage we studied in our first streams, okay, that using annotated is wiser and safer, okay. And it's the same thing they tell us here, prefer to use the annotated version if possible. Let's continue. They're saying the last common query params in depends common query params, okay, which is this part, okay. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, let me just message this person. All right, sorry about that. I've responded to the person. I will talk to them later. So yeah, so the last part, which is this one here, okay, they're referring to this one, but let me remove this so I don't confuse you. And I want not only to confuse, but also not to confuse myself. And I also want to stick to the best and recommended practice. Okay, so I'll copy this, okay, and replace it with the function name. I mean the class name replacing the function name. And now this is called, this is the part they're referring to. When they say the last common query params in, this is the last part, okay? This one here, okay? Come on, what's happening to me? I can't select stuff properly. So this is the last part they're referring to, from depends to the end, okay? This part, okay? So they're saying is what FastAPI will actually use to know what is the dependency. Yeah, just like I explained to you earlier. And they're saying it is from this one that FastAPI will extract the declared parameters, and that is what FastAPI will actually call. So they're saying in this case, the first query params in Python 3.8 plus. Okay. Okay, they're giving two versions. Okay, but let us stick to this. Okay, the first query param, which is this part. Okay, this one here. So in this case, it is this one here. Okay, whether you're working in this way or you're working without using annotated, still it will be the first value, common query params. Okay, so saying this first one, which comes first. Okay, doesn't have any special meaning for FastAPI. FastAPI won't use it for data conversion, validation, etc., as it is using the depends common query params for that. Okay, interesting. So the dependable here is what is actually being used for validation, etc. No, that's nice. So you're saying you could actually just write something like this, annotated with any. Okay, the same thing as here. You could say commons equals to this, and it would work. This is good to know. So let's just do this. Okay, copy this one here and write them all the versions. So they're saying, remember the other way, okay, of writing this above, like without using annotated, I can simply say common query params equals to depends common query params like this. Okay. Another way would be simply here. I can say any, okay, because this initial type here, okay, this one here means nothing really special. Okay. I ever typed Ctrl Z. Let me put this back. So here I can simply say any, okay, because this type means nothing, like you say, it does nothing. The actual validation, filtering, and whatever happens from here, okay. So you see, we can just use any, okay, and also here the saying I can simply turn this to any, okay, and I think we need to import it from typing import any, this one. So you see, yeah, gets shorter, and now, yeah, it really now makes sense what is now going on, okay, concerning all this. So I will continue reading. So they're saying as in, okay, yeah, this is how it will look like, okay, and like you see, they've highlighted this, okay. These other things from here to here, but we already know what this is, okay, and also this, but the main point of interest is this, okay. So using any, because using common query params in place of any means nothing, because like you see, they've said here, FastAPI won't use it for data conversion validation, as it is using depends common query params for that. Good to know. Okay, and also for you who are using other versions of Python, again, you can read this, but simply same concept and slight changes in the syntax, so you can watch out for that. So they're saying, but declaring the type is encouraged, as that way your editor will know what will be passed as the parameter commons, and then it will help you with code completion and type checks. Yeah, actually, it's what I said earlier. Now, actually, I'm starting to have a battle in my mind, but it's good they put this statement. Okay, so like I've seen their editor here helping them with that kind of stuff. Okay, because if I came here, okay, you see now we have common. Okay, even this first one, if I say common, okay, just below case, I say common dot, okay, you see there's nothing. This is just AI. This other text you're seeing, okay, this other text you're seeing is just AI stuff, okay, but the editor has not brought anything, okay. But if I change any to common query params, okay, then I say common dot, you see the editor now brings this drop down window for where I can now pick stuff, okay, and I think I prefer having the type there instead of saying any. I prefer having the type. Even if it is long, even if any is being shorter, I prefer having this. I don't know what you guys say, if you agree with me. Share your thoughts. So shortcut, but you see that we are having the same code repetition here, writing common query params twice, okay? So for Python 3.8 plus, it's like this. Python 3.8 plus, but without annotated, it will appear like this, like I've already shown you again and again and again. We have seen this multiple times. But again, they keep saying use annotated. So I'm going to stick to these versions, okay? which I've annotated. So they're saying FastAPI provides a shortcut for these cases in where the dependency is specifically a class that FastAPI will call to create an instance of the class itself. So they're saying for those cases, you can do the following. Okay, so instead of writing something like this, okay, you write commons annotated, okay, common query params depends, okay. So the difference that we're not passing common query params inside here, okay. So they're saying you declare the dependency as the type of the parameter, which is this. This is the first step. This is the type, okay. And use depends without any parameter. This is in this. This is depends without any parameter. This other one is depends with a parameter. Okay, so they say use depends without any parameter instead of having to write the full class inside of depends. Okay, like this. The same example would then look like, if we scroll, you see this is how it looks. So ideally, it has to be like this. I have to remove this. Okay. Yeah, this is how it would look like. Okay. So let's repetition. And I think we get still the editor support. Let's continue. And it's saying, and FastAPI will know what to do. So there's a tip. It says, if that seems more if that seems more confusing than helpful, disregard it. You don't need it. It is just a shortcut because FastAPI cares about helping you minimize code repetition. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So yeah, that is it. So I'm going down to the next topic. Okay. So yeah, you can take a moment to process that and think. I appreciate them for that. Very, very good. Okay. So yeah, let's take a sip of water and a minute's rest, and then we continue. All right, friends. Time to continue. I'll be studying now next sub-dependencies. Okay. And I think because of doing a lot of this again and again, everything else has become very easy to understand. So sub-dependencies, you're saying you can create dependencies that have sub-dependencies, meaning a dependency of a dependency, in other words, or parent-child relationship. Okay, excuse me. And they're saying they can be as deep as you need to be, meaning you might have a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. They can be as deep as you need them to be. FastAPI will take care of solving them. Fast dependency dependable, okay? You could create a fast dependency dependable like, okay, something like this, what I've highlighted, okay? We have this query extractor, okay, having q, which is either a string or none, but the default value is none, okay? And you see the return that very q. Hey, by the way, I skipped some code because I know it's common to us, but I like it. What I like, it reminds me of cookie. Remember cookie? We studied cookie about maybe in stream either 19 or 18 or 17 around there. Okay, but pretty nice to know about this. Pretty nice. So yeah, let's continue. Okay, so it's going forward. Only I think we should just concentrate on the points of interest. Okay, so for now, don't understand this. What I've highlighted. It is simply a function. Okay, with one function parameter called q, which can be a string or none, but has a default value of none, meaning it's actually optional. Okay. Then we continue for other versions and variants. Again, you can check here, but syntax changes, but same thing. Okay. So saying it declares an optional query parameter q as a string str, then it just returns it, which you already know. This is quite simple not very useful, but will help us focus on how sub-dependencies work. Second dependency, dependable and dependent. Then you create another dependency function, a dependable that at the same time declares a dependency of its own. Okay, meaning it's a dependent too. And let us look at it. Okay, we have we have it here. Okay, so you see we have this function is going to be a dependable query. Okay, remember we had query extractor, the first dependency. Okay, then you have query or cookie extractor, which is also a dependent, but it also depends on query extract. How have I known that? Because of this selected line of code. Okay, having q as the parameter, annotated, then string is the type, but it depends on query extractor. Okay, interesting. Okay, and then if you come to this function here, the our path operation function, you see that it has a dependable code. They're saying query or default, annotated, type is a string, and the metadata is a dependable expression. Okay, it depends on query or cookie extractor, which is this. Okay, but query or cookie extractor depends on query extractor, which is this function. So a dependable of a dependable. I see nothing hard here, especially the fact that what I learned yesterday, or rather what we learned yesterday, it's basically the same thing. I don't know if you guys see it. Do you see it? It's the same thing. Very easy to understand. So simply, if you have multiple functions, okay, one can depend on another, which depends on another, okay? And FastAPI will take responsibility and will know how to extract the information and do validation and filter. Pretty cool. I love this, okay? So let's go and say, let's focus on the parameters declared, okay? Even though this function is a dependency or dependent by itself, it also declares another dependency it depends on. The meaning this one here. This one is a dependency, okay? Here, how do it's a dependency? Query or cookie extractor is a dependency which depends on query extractor. As simple as that. That's what they're meaning by that. It depends on the query extractor and assigns the value returned by it to the parameter q, like I've just told you, okay? And it says it declares an optional last query cookie as a string. This one here, an optional last query cookie. How do we know that it's a optional, guys? Why? Because of none. We know this, okay? We know this, okay? Because of none. Once you use say equals to none in FastAPI, it becomes optional, and that's very obvious, okay? How do we know it's a cookie? We look at the metadata. This is the metadata cookie, a function which returns a special class, okay? How do you add metadata? Using annotated. Like, guys, just concepts repeating over and over again. I see nothing hard. Actually, let me tell you, the hardest things we studied were probably the first, can I say the first 8 streams? But these others they're just repeating. They're just repeating. There's nothing really. Okay? The same, if the user doesn't provide a query queue, we use the last query used, which we saved to a cookie before. Okay? As simple as that. Linus in the chat says, yes, it is similar to what we saw yesterday. Yeah, that's correct, Linus. And I'm glad that you're able to notice that. It shows you're actually learning. I hope the rest of us are also able to recognize that. So they say use the dependency. Then we can use the dependency with, okay? They're just now highlighting this code, but I've already explained it, okay? But let me go through it for you, okay? Not actually for you, but also for me, because I'm also learning. It's funny when I'm saying I'm going it through for you, but actually I'm going it through for myself too, because I'm not just here to live stream stuff, but to actually learn. Okay, so we have query extractor, okay, which is a dependency of query or cookie extractor. How do I know that? Because of this depends query extractor, okay? And then this function here is also used as a dependency here, okay? So query extractor is a dependency of query or cookie extractor, which is a dependency of read query path operation function. As simple as that. And of course, those having other versions and variants, you can check this. Just syntax, which is changing mostly because of the annotations, but same concept. Info. Notice we are only declaring one dependency in the path operation function. Yes, this one here, query or cookie extractor. But FastAPI will know that it has to solve query extractor first. So this one will be solve first to pass results of that to query or cookie extractor while calling it. So this one will first be called, okay? So Q, what is returned here will be passed to this function here first, okay? Once it has been passed to this function also executes its logic and then passes the value to read query, okay? So take note of that, and the actual value will be here, okay? And they have a simple diagram here saying query extractor, query or query extractor, then items finally, okay, to this items endpoint, okay. That's how we get the actual value. So they're saying using the same dependency multiple times. If one of your dependency is declared multiple times for the same path operation, for example, multiple dependencies have a common sub-dependency, FastAPI will know to call that sub-dependency only per request. Okay? So in other words, the FastAPI knows that there are many, okay? The dependency has been declared multiple times, but it will call it only once per request, which is a good thing. Okay? And it says it will save the return value in a cache, okay? So temporary memory, okay? And pass it to all the dependents that need it in a specific request. And instead of calling the dependency multiple times for the same request, this is good for good performance, okay? Catching it and then giving it to other people, other functions that need it, okay? So they're saying in an advanced scenario where you know you need the dependency to be called at every step, okay, possibly multiple times in the same request, instead of using the cached value, you can set the parameter use catch equals to false when using depends, like here, okay. Say use catch equals to false, okay. So in this case, this is something that will be called at every step multiple times, and probably you know that every time this thing is called, the value changes, okay. You don't want it to be cached, okay, because the people who are consuming your API are going to get stale or raw data, okay. So you say use catch equals to false, meaning, and by the way, when you read Python and you see use catch equals to false, in your mind just know that use catch is equals to true by default, okay. So I will then go on to read the recap, okay. So they're saying apart from all the fancy words used here, the dependency injection system is quite simple. Correct. Just functions that look the same as path operation functions. True. Just big words, but concept is easy. But still, it is very powerful, allows you to declare arbitrarily, deeply nested dependency graphs. Okay. Then they have a tip for us. They're saying all this may not seem as useful with these simple examples, but you will see how useful it is in the chapters about security, and you will also see the amounts of code it will save you. So after studying dependency, the next topic we're going to, okay, is security, and I can't wait. Okay, but of course now they can't spend time explaining to us dependency injection and dependencies and what security at the same time. Okay, they shouldn't do that. That's why I think they have a section on dependencies alone. Okay, so let's now go to the next topic. Okay, so again, we're studying dependencies. Either we began on dependencies in general. Right now we have looked at classes as dependencies. We have studied sub-dependencies, Now we are studying dependencies in path operation decorators. Okay, then we go. But the dependencies we've been studying are dependencies in path operation functions. Okay, so take note of that. Okay, so yeah, just give me a minute. I need my brain to, okay, just to relax and yeah, and then we continue with this. Okay, cool stuff. I really love this. Okay, then we continue learning. Let me take just some water right now. All right, friends on the internet. I hope I've not muted my mic. All right, let's continue. Dependencies in path operation decorators. Okay, by now, of course, we know the difference between a path operation decorator and a path operation function. So they're saying in some cases, you don't really need to return the value of a dependency inside your path operation function, or the dependency doesn't return a value, but you still need it to be executed or solved. Okay, let me read this again. In some cases, you don't really need the return value of a dependency inside the path operation function, or the dependency doesn't return a value, but you still need it to be executed or solved. For those cases, instead of declaring a path operation function parameter with depends, you can add a list of dependencies to the excuse me, sorry about that. For those cases, instead of declaring a path operation function with depends, you can add a list of dependencies to the path operation decorator. Okay, so this happens when it doesn't return a value, but you want it to be executed or solved. Okay, so because I'm sure they can ask this in an interview. Okay, ask you in an interview. When would you decide to create a to use have a dependency in your path operation decorator instead of the path operation function? When the answer could be when the dependency doesn't return a value. Excuse me, sorry about that. Now let's continue. So they're saying add dependencies to the path operation decorator. The path operation decorator receives an argument dependencies. It should be a list of depends. Okay, so this works in Python 3.9 and above. They import annotated, depends, FastAPI, header, HTTP execution. Okay, now I'm like that they're bringing back things we have studied like header, excuse me, HTTP exception, and of course in the previous stuff we saw that they brought back what it's called cookie. Okay, so we have app because the first API, we have a function called verify token. Okay, and it's async def. Okay, we know what this means because we have studied this. It's clear. We have X token. Okay, annotated, and we know that annotated will take in the type and metadata. And this time the metadata is a header. So we know that X token is a header parameter and it should be a string. We know that FastAPI will take care of validating for us this, extracting and validating this for us. So simple if statement is saying if the token is not equals to this string, okay, then they raise an HTTP exception with a status code 400, a bad request, and a detail saying X token header invalid. Okay. Then they have another function called verify key called X key, a string, and it's also header, okay, and has similar validation. Okay. So this one, remember, this one here returns a value. This one does not return a value. Okay. You know, if you, like we are Python developers, we know that there's a difference between raising an exception and returning a value. Okay. So if we go to our function, look at this function here. Okay. This path of operation decorator. Okay. It has dependencies. Remember up here. Remember they said the path operation decorator receives an optional argument dependencies. It should be a list of depends. Okay. In fact, when you say dependencies, you see that dependency is plural, meaning many. Okay. So if you come here, it is actually a list. Okay, of dependencies. The first one is this one here, verify token. Okay. Then the second one is this one here, verify key. Okay. And of course, like you know by now, other versions and variants, you have to change a few things in your syntax. Okay. And you can look at that. So you're saying these dependencies will be executed or solved the same way as normal dependencies, but their value, okay, if they return any, won't be passed to your path operation function. If you look at what we did earlier, I think I didn't release it. I mean, use it. Are you seeing these functions here? These values here? Queue, skip, limit. Okay. For this one here called common parameters. What have I done? Okay, common parameters. Okay. They are returned. Okay. To our path operation function. When we have this common here, we'll have the data that we need from the dependencies. But for this case, when we use it in this case in the path operation decorator, okay, remember these others are in the path operation function, but these others are in the path operation decorators, so they won't return any value. Okay, no information will be passed. Okay, so they're saying some editors check for unused function parameters and show them as errors. Using dependencies in the path operation decorator, you can make sure they are executed while avoiding editor or tooling errors. It might also help avoid confusion for new developers that see an unused parameter in your code and think it's unnecessary. And of course, if a developer thinks it's an unnecessary, they'll remove it. Okay. And that would probably, an AI tool would probably do the same. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, just to read this again, some editors check for unused function parameters and show them as errors. Using these dependencies in the path operation decorator, you make sure they are executed while avoiding editor or tooling errors. It might also help to avoid confusion for new developers that see an unused parameter in your code and could think it's unnecessary. Info. In this example, we inverted custom headers X key and X token. Okay, these two, X key and X token. Okay, but in real cases, when implementing security, you would get more benefits from using the integrated security utilities. The next, and they're saying we won't be studying this in the next chapter. Okay, so they're saying dependencies, errors, and return values. You can use the same dependency functions you use normally. Okay, and they say dependency requirements. Okay, they can declare request requirements like headers or other sub-dependencies, like we have seen. Okay, X token is a header. Okay, X key is also a header. Okay, and they're saying they can declare request requirements like headers or other sub-dependencies, meaning it can require things like cookies. Okay, or a query parameter. Okay, like in this case, these are query parameters. Okay, good to know. Okay, so they say raise exceptions. They say these dependencies can raise exceptions the same as normal dependencies, and actually that's what happening here. Okay, and of course I've already explained this when we were studying it above. So you see this one raises an exception, this one also raises an exception. Okay, and both of them return statuses 400, and you know that 400 means bad request. And with detail, the detail is simply the message of this the message of this of your error. Okay, the actual error message. Then we see return values. They say they can return values or not. The values won't be used because, like you see, this one returns X key. This one doesn't return anything. It only raises. This one raises an error and also returns, but that value is never given to. Is never used or given to this read underscore items. That's the key thing we have to know here. Okay, and it's something which I want to understand from this stream. Okay. So they say they can return values or not. The values won't be used. So you can reuse a normal dependency that returns a value you already used somewhere else. Even though the value won't be used, the dependency will be executed. Okay. So these are executed, okay, but it won't be used anywhere. Okay. That's a good thing. But I think it's going to make sense to us when we are studying about security. Okay. In the next chapter, that's actually tomorrow when we shall be studying that. And you're saying dependencies for a group of path operations. Later, when reading about how to structure bigger applications, okay, and look at this, there's a section on studying how to structure. I'm now getting excited because by the time I'm done with this, I'll be ready to know how to structure the app I want to build. Okay. They're saying when reading about how to structure big applications in the section bigger application multiple files, possibly with multiple files, you will learn how to declare a single dependencies parameter for a group of path operations. Okay. Actually, guys, what we are doing right now is simply laying the foundation for the project I'm going to build. Okay. And of course, as I'll be coding, now I'll be from time to time asking AI. Okay. Really come into this documentation, and wow, it will be so nice and so quick. Okay. Imagine now combining AI with this raw knowledge I'm getting. It's going to be crazy. I can't wait. So it's a global dependency. Saying next we will see how to add dependencies to the whole fast API application so that they apply to each operation. And there we go. Next we have global dependency. So yeah, this is the second last topic. Looks like we have come a long way this night. Again, just a moment, about a minute. I'll take another minute again just to rest, and then we continue. 1 minute, please. Let me just take a sip of water. Wow, guys, thank you, Linus, for letting me know. I was actually what? Muted. Wow, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let me know if you can hear me. Really, 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 really terrible. I don't know. I forgot to unmute the mic, but I'm now back. Okay. I'm now back. I'm now back. Please let me know you can hear me. I'm going to restart this whole page. Wow. 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 This is very bad. Forgive me. Yeah, please guys, when we're watching, when we're learning together, please, yeah, you can chat and we have some company, okay? So that we get to, to talk. So let me restart. Global dependencies. They're saying for some types of applications, you may want to add dependencies to the whole application. Okay, because you have to notice that we have been creating dependencies for only particular path operation functions. Okay, like for example, dependencies for items and dependencies. Dependencies for only single endpoints. Okay, like for only this one or only this one. Okay, but for the the entire application, we have to use this. Okay, which is pretty cool. And the similar way you can add dependencies to the path operation decorators, you can add them to the FastAPI application, meaning we are actually adding them to this. Okay, to this. Okay, and then they're saying in that case, they will be applied to all the path operation functions in the application. Why? Because now they say, well, if you apply to this, okay, and you came here and you said app dot, okay, because you're creating all the endpoints from this object here, from this variable called app, it has to definitely affect all of them, okay? It makes sense. Just affect all of them, okay? Yeah, so let's go on. Let me note again. Let me not hallucinate like AI and assume things that I don't know. So I'll continue. Thank you, Linus, for confirming in the chat that you can now hear me. I really appreciate. So the thing in Python 3.9 and above, okay, they're showing us how to do it. Okay, we have seen all this in the previous documentation, in the previous page, and all this. What is changing is simply this. Okay, that instead of having it in your path operation decorator, notice that we have already learned about two ways we can add these dependencies in the path operation decorator or the path operation function. Those that go in the path operation function can return a value. We can read their value. Those that go in the path operation decorator can't return a value. Okay. Now we're learning about a third way that we can add a dependencies list, just like we can add a dependencies list to the path operation decorator in the application itself. Now this is global, the whole thing. We have a dependencies list, okay, which now has two dependencies. This is the first one and the second one, okay? So it depends verify token, which is this one, then depends verify key. So two dependencies, okay? Oh, isn't that awesome? And they're saying, and of course, other versions and variants, you can check this, but it's the same concept. And they're saying all the ideas in the section about adding dependencies to the path operation decorators still apply. But in this case, to all of the path operations in the app. Okay. All the ideas in the section about adding dependencies to the path operation decorator still apply, but in this case to all. Okay. Yeah. So meaning the concepts transfer. The same thing, only that this time you're doing it for everything. Okay. So meaning all this will apply to this and this. Okay. So, and remember, this one you're saying the ideas about adding dependencies to path operation decorators. Okay, so it is adding dependencies to path operation decorators, not path operation functions. I actually not seen that. I was going to miss that. And you know what happens with path operation decorators? The value is not returned. Have that in mind, guys. Okay, have that in mind. So they're saying dependencies for groups of path operations. Later, when reading about how to structure big applications, okay, in brackets, big applications, multiple files, possibly with multiple files, you will learn how to declare a single dependencies parameter for a group of path operations. Okay, we shall see that soon. So let's go now to the next part. And again, when I reach here, I take a break and I'll be back. Okay, just give me a minute. I'll be back. Just 1 minute. And this time I'm not muting, okay? Just take a sip and then I continue. Liner says, so it means global dependencies can or cannot return something that will not be used anywhere. Yeah, technically, but mostly cannot return, okay? But yeah, we're going to see the actual use, I think, in the next session of securities. I don't want to I don't want to come to a conclusion to that, but right now, at least I'm sure is that the value won't be given. Your function, your dependency may return a value, but that value won't be used, okay? That's the whole idea. You can say return X, but that value won't be used. It won't be passed to your path of operation function. But if that dependency is in a path operation function, it will be returned, okay, and it will be used. And you can use it rather. I don't know. Do you guys feel hot after talking for a long time? Okay, let's continue. Dependencies with yield. Okay. Interesting how we have covered all this. Imagine if I had this same energy for since the beginning. Okay. Don't you think we would have covered like the first 5 streams in one stream? But I don't know. I think learning is, I don't know how to say it. Maybe it's depends maybe on the day, the amount of work you've done. So sometimes I come to these streams when I'm tired, but because I'm committed, I have to learn. Okay. Let us continue. Fast APIs with yield. Fast API supports dependencies that do some extra steps after finishing. Okay. So to do this, use yield instead of return and write the extra steps, which is the code after. Okay. And I think we know what yield does. Those of you who have been writing Python, okay, for some time, you know, can write generator functions using yield. Okay. So they're saying tip, make sure to use yield one single time per dependency. Lena says, yes, you feel hot because you're burning calories, like in the gym. Oh, that's good to know. Linus, are you like a health worker, like a doctor, nutritionist, whatever, transitioning to tech? Or have you been doing that before? Yeah, but that's good to know. I feel because I'm burning calories. So ideally, I would have to. Can I say it's an exercise? Is that a good thing? That's my is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Okay. Yeah, but actually you're right. If because in certain particular streams, like after like in the past like 4 streams and even now, okay, you talk, but after you actually feel a little bit empty, like hungry. Okay. All right, let's continue. Let me not waste time in conversation. Technical details. They say any function that is valid to any function that is valid to use with context lib context manager or context lib.async context manager would be valid to use if would be valid to use as a fast API dependency. In fact, fast API uses those two decorators internally. Okay, these are the technical details. But of course, yeah, let's go ahead to read and know the real stuff. Okay. So you're saying a database dependency with yield. For example, you could use this to create a database session and close it after finishing. Only the code prior to, including the yield statement, is executed before creating a response. Okay, I'll read this again. For example, you could use this to create a database session and close it after finishing. Only the code prior to and including the yield statement is executed before creating a response. Okay, so let's say Python 3.8. They have an async function called getDB. Okay, so they have a DB session instance, then they try, okay, they yield DB, then finally close. Okay, so they're saying you could use it to create a database session. So this is the database session they have created. Okay, then after it has finished, they close in this final state. They're saying only the code prior to and including the yield statement is executed before creating a response. So before the response is created, this is executed. Okay, so they're saying the yielded value is what is injected into path operations and other dependencies. Okay, this value here. Okay, yield is what is injected. Okay, so they're saying the code following the yield statement is executed after creating the response, but before sending it. Okay, so this part here, okay, is only executed after the response, which required yield. Okay, so there are parts. Okay, there is before you create the response. Okay, then after. Okay, so you first create the response, but before sending it. Okay, I hope you're not confused. It's tricky. The code following the yield statement is executed after creating the response, but before sending it. Okay, so the response is not sent to the client when this has not been worked on. Okay, so this is used for the response if required. Okay, so the response is created, but after that they execute this. Okay, then finally the response is sent. So the whole idea is this: yield, okay, a value. That value can be used to create the response. Okay, okay, so let me just get this straight and correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. Okay, according to what they have said so far, this is the order of steps. Create the response. Okay, after creating the response, yield is executed. After yield is executed, close. Okay, this thing finally is called. Okay, then sent. So this is what I think. We put it there. Use a doc string here like so. Create response. Okay, yield. Okay, close, then send response. This is how I understand it. Set tip, you can use async or regular functions. FastAPI will do the right thing with each, the same as with normal dependencies. Yeah, pretty cool. Lena says, I'm transitioning from electrical engineering to software engineering. Wow, you have a solid background. You have a solid background. Yeah, and you're going to do just fine. A dependency with yield and try. If you use a try block in a dependency with yield, you will receive an exception that was thrown when using the dependency. Okay. For example, if some code at some point in the middle in another dependency or in a path operation made a database transaction roll back, okay, meaning undoing a database operation or create any other error, you will receive the exception in your dependency. So you can look for that specific exception inside the dependency with except some exception. Okay. In the same way, you can use finally to make sure to make sure the exit steps are executed no matter if there was an exception or not. Of course, we know that finally will always work whether there was an exception or not. Okay. And of course, at any point in the middle of your dependency, as long as anything, an exception handles, it will be given to you and you have to handle it. Okay. So when using a dependency, if any exception happens, you just know it will be you'll receive it. Okay, you receive it. So they're saying the sub-dependencies with yield. You can have sub-dependencies and trees of sub-dependencies of any size and shape, and any or all of them can use yield. Okay, so sub-dependencies or a tree, or meaning many, a dependency of a dependency of a dependency of a sub-dependency of a sub-dependency of a sub-dependency, all of them can use yield. Okay, they say FastAPI will make sure the exit code in each dependency with yield is run in the correct order. And of course, we'd expect it to do this. If they didn't do this, it would be hell. Okay, it would be trouble. So they're saying follow dependency. For example, dependency C can have a dependency B and dependency B on dependency A. So you see they have a dependency A, okay, dependency B, but remember dependency B is depending on dependency A. Okay, I know that because of this clause. And then they have a dependency C, which depends on dependency B. So dependency C depends on dependency B, and dependency B depends on dependency A. So FastAPI will execute dependency A correctly, then execute with dependency B and dependency C in the right order. Okay, so again, for other versions and variants, you can check this, but the same concept, just different syntax. Suddenly it's slight, it's not much. All of them can use yield. In this case, dependency C, which is this one here, okay, this function, to execute its exit code needs the value from dependency B. Okay, so I think this dependency C dot close. For it to close, it needs a value from dependency B to be still available, and I've named it dep B, this one here. Okay, and in turn, dependency B needs the value from dependency A, here named dep A, to be available for its exit code. Okay, here in this case, for dependency B, dep B to close, it needs dep A, this value here, which comes from dependency A. Okay, you have to take note of that. All right, okay. Yeah, and then they've highlighted those parts here, okay, in the finally clause. So again, other versions and variants, you know what's up with that. So they're saying the same way, you could have some dependencies with yield and some other dependencies with return, and have some of those depend on some of the others. You could have a single dependency that requires several other dependencies with yield, among others. You can have any combination of dependencies that you want. FastAPI will make sure everything is run in the correct order. Anad Search says, I have some doubts about cookies and GWT token. What are those doubts? Okay. We actually did a session, okay, on cookies. You can check if you look at this, where's cookie? We looked at cookie parameters, we looked at cookie parameter models. You can watch those streams. And very soon we're going to look at GWT in security. This could be maybe tomorrow. Okay. So yeah, we'll be looking at GWT. When it comes to GWT concerning FastAPI, I don't know, but I understand the concept of GWT because I've worked with them in Spring Boot. I've worked with them in Node.js, Express. I've worked with them in Django. Okay, so let's go on. Let me just deal with a notification here. Someone over texting. I think it might be important for me to reply to them. Just a few seconds. Okay. Another search is asking, is a cookie created at the front end or back end? How to invalidate GTLD token before its expiry time? Like user logs out before expiry time. Okay. So yeah, so another search. Okay. A cookie is usually created by the backend. Okay. But it can also be read, written, or modified by the front end in some cases. Okay. So like in case of backend created cookies, just say like in most common in authentication, okay, like maybe using session IDs among others. Okay, you can set you send, okay, cookies using what they call HTTP headers. Okay, called, is it set cookie? Okay, for example, like in Django, Express.js, even here in FastAPI. Okay, after login, the backend can send a set cookie. Okay, something like this. Where is this code of mine? Let me remove this. Just to answer that question before we continue. Okay. So the backend can send something like this. See? Set cookie. Okay. By the backend. Like this. Then it says maybe the cookies maybe session ID equals to maybe ABC123. But this is going to be used for authentication. Okay. Then it can have maybe something like HTTP only. Okay. HTTP, something like this, some information like this, saying maybe only this is secure. Okay. This is assume. Okay. Okay. But our interest is here is the, forgive my spelling, is the set cookie. Okay. Then via JavaScript, this on the front end via JavaScript. Okay. So you can have maybe like, let me just put here some titles. Back end. Okay. Space. When I come here, I say front. I want this to be uppercase front end. Okay. So front end, I think the front end has something like document.cookie. Okay. Document.cookie. Okay. You can you create it, okay, using what's this, what this guy is doing? Want just something like that, simple string. Okay. But I think it's not secure. Okay, especially for sensitive data. Okay. And you cannot set, I don't think you can set HTTP only. Okay, which protects from JavaScript access. Okay, HTTP only protects from JavaScript access. Okay, so you can create, so ideally, this is the summary. Okay, you can create a cookie on the backend, front end. Which one is secure? Backend, secure. Front end, not secure. HTTP flag only on backend, yes. Front end, that. Okay, JavaScript access, if it's not, if it's HTTP only. Okay, so ideally backends can typically create secure cookies. Okay, that's the goal. So creating secure cookie, your backend. Okay, but frontends can also create them if needed. Actually, let me go to, let me scroll on to quickly. Let me just divert a little bit and show you something. Where is my console? Is this the console? These are styles. Okay, I try to zoom out a little bit, expand this a little bit, come into the console. Okay, if I say document dot cookie, yeah, come on, what is this? I want to type the whole thing. Okay, let me just read it here. Document, okay, dot cookie. Okay, so like now here you see I have some data I've got. Okay, some cookies. So in JavaScript, but you can do it with JavaScript, but of course, you know what I've recommended to you. The safe way, set the cookies using your backend. Other question, you're saying how to invalidate GWT token before its expiry time, like user. Yeah, to invalidate, you have to now do you have to have what they call a blacklist. Okay, you can blacklist them. Okay, depending on your logic. Okay, so blacklisting tokens is a common practice. Okay, so yeah, you can do blacklisting. That can be a good solution. So Anna Search, I hope I've answered your questions. Yeah, good questions, by the way. Those are good questions. So let's continue studying to finish this. I see it is getting late on my end. Okay, I was done with this technical detail saying this works thanks to Python's context manager. FastAPI uses them internally to achieve this. So dependencies with yield and HTTP exception. You saw that you can use dependencies with yield and you saw that you can use dependencies with yield and have try blocks that catch exceptions. The same way, wait, let me move this. The same way you could raise an exception or similar in the exit code after the yield. Okay, saying a tip. This is this is a somewhat advanced technique, and in most of the cases you won't really need it, as you can raise exceptions, including HTTP exception from inside the rest of your application code, for example, in the path operation function. Okay, but it's there for you if you need it. Okay, so they're saying you saw that you can use dependencies with yield and have try blocks that catch exceptions. The same way you can raise an exceptions or similar in the exit code after the yield. Okay, but this is like advanced, but it's good to know, because if you need it, then yeah, you know what to do. So we come here. Yeah, we see that example in this chunk which they've highlighted. Get username, they yield a string, okay, then they accept owner as e, then there is that exception, okay, and then yeah, you're seeing it here, okay. The thing in this check, if item owner is not equal to username, then they raise owner error. There we are. Okay, yeah, so makes this more interesting. Okay, and I guess from time to time, as we shall be working, if anything is unclear, we come back and we read documentation. As an alternative, you could use to catch exceptions and possibly raise another HTTP exception to create a custom exception handler. Well, I'm feeling the tiredness now. Let's get done with this stream. And that says I kind of store the blacklist tokens in my DB and verify them if there's any better method. I'm not sure. Guys, if you're on this stream and you know any better method, please let us know. But I only know about blacklisting. If you know about any, please type in the chat, okay? We are learning together. I personally I can't know everything. I know, but it is hard for everybody, for one person to know everything, okay? Please, I would appreciate, okay, to learn from you. So say dependencies with yield and except. If you catch an exception using except in a dependency with yield and you don't raise it again or raise a new exception, FastAPI won't be able to notice there was an exception. The same way that would happen with regular Python. So if you catch an exception using except in a dependency with yield, you don't raise it. So when you catch an exception, make sure you raise it again. Okay. If you catch an exception in a dependency with yield, so like here, okay. If you catch, like remember they're catching internal error, okay, and they don't raise that error again, FastAPI won't be able to notice there's an exception. And this is how normal Python behavior works, okay? And this is the point of interest here, showing us. So let's go on. The thing in this case, the client will see an HTTP 500 internal server error response as it should, given that we are not raising an HTTP exception or similar, but the server will not have any logs or any other indication of what was the error. This is good. So the client knows something went wrong on the server, but on the server there'll be no log because you simply didn't. This is what happened, okay? And they've explained to us that FastAPI won't be able to notice there was an exception. Why? Because we caught it but did not raise it again. We're simply printing. So they're saying always raise in dependencies with yield and except. If you catch an exception in a dependency with yield, unless you are raising another HTTP exception or similar, you should re-raise the original exception. you can re-raise the same exception using raise. Of course, we know about raise. So if I come back here, okay, you see they say they catch an internal error, but they simply raise. But actually, this is Python. You know that in Python, by simply saying raise, you raise the previously called internal error, okay, which is good. So they're saying this is the best practice to do. Okay, I hope I remember this when I'm building. So they're saying now the client will get the same HTTP 500 internal server error response, but the server will have our custom internal error in the logs. And logs are very important, by the way. Those of you who have done backend development for some time, you know that logs can save you. Okay, can literally save you. So they're saying execution of dependencies with yield. The sequence of execution is more like this diagram. Time flows from the top to bottom, and each column is one of the parts interacting or executing the code. Yeah, I think we pretty much know this, okay? So it says from top to bottom. On the top, we have client, exception handler, dependency with yield, path operation function, background tasks. So they say can raise exceptions, including HTTP exception. Then we have all this, blah, blah, blah. I don't think I need to know all this now, okay? So they're saying info, only one response will be sent to the client. It might be one of the error responses, or it will be the response from the path operation function. No, let me read this again. Only one response will be sent to the client. It might be one of the error responses, or it will be the response from the path operation. After one of those responses is sent, no other response can be sent. Okay, so yeah, but the point is that time flows from top to bottom, and each column is representing the parts interacting or execution code. Yeah, so you can look at this step by step. So each column, these columns here, is one of the parts interacting or executing talk, but all time flows from the top here while going down. Okay. So let us say a tip is saying this diagram shows HTTP exception, but you could also raise any other exception that you catch in a dependency with yield or a custom exception handler. And we said about custom exception handlers. I don't know if you guys remember them. Okay. I think we studied that. And let me go there. I'll show you maybe after this. So dependencies with yield, exception, except, and background. Wow, this is I think the longest stream I've done. Feeling pretty tired. You probably don't need these technical details. You can skip this section and continue below. These details are useful mainly if you're using a version of FastAPI prior to 0.106 and used resources from dependencies. Okay, I can just read the fast. So they're saying dependencies with yield except technical details. They're saying before FastAPI 0.10, if you used a dependency with yield, then you captured an exception with except in that dependency, you didn't raise the exception again, the exception will be automatically raised or forwarded to any exception handlers or the internal server error handler. This was changed in version 0.110.0 to fix unhandled memory consumption from forwarded exception without a handler, internal server errors, to make it consistent with the behavior of regular Python code. Background tasks and dependencies with yield technical details. Before FastAPI 0.06.0, raising exceptions after yield was not possible. The exit code in the dependencies with yield was executed after the response was sent. So exception handlers would have already run. But of course, we know that it is now possible. This was designed this way mainly to allow using the same objects yielded by dependencies instead of background tasks. Because the exit code would be executed after the background tasks were finished. Nevertheless, as this would mean waiting for the response to travel through the network while unnecessarily holding a resource in a dependency with yield. For example, a database connection. This was changed in FastAPI 0.1060. Tip: Additionally, a background task is normally an independent set of logic that should be handled separately with its own resources. For example, its own database connection. So this way, you will probably have cleaner code. And they say if you use to rely on this behavior, now you should create resources for the background tasks inside the background task itself and use internally only data that doesn't depend on the resources of dependencies with yield. For example, instead of using the same database session, you would create a new database session inside of the background task, and you would obtain the objects from the database using this new session. And then instead of passing the object from the database as a parameter to the background task function, you would pass the ID of that object and then obtain the object again inside the background tasks. So they say instead of passing the object from the database as a parameter to the background task function, you would pass the ID of that object and then obtain the object again inside the background task function. Okay. They say context managers. So what are context managers? Context managers are any of those Python objects that you can use in a with statement. Okay. For example, you can use with to read a file. Well, I think we know this with open. We know about this. Okay. So saying underneath the open, some file or txt creates an object called a context manager. I think everybody who knows Python knows about this. When the with block finishes, it makes sure to close the file, even if there were exceptions. When you create a dependency with yield, FastAPI will internally create a context manager for it and combine it with other related tools. Okay, this is nice. Because now if you've learned Python and you know how a context manager works, for example, like in handling files, now you know that a dependency under the hood there, FastAPI creates a context manager and closes everything. So they're saying using context managers in dependencies with yield. They're saying this is more or less an advanced idea. If you're just starting with FastAPI, you might want to skip it for now. Like me, I'm just a beginner. Okay. In FastAPI, so they're saying in Python, you can create context managers by creating a class with two methods: enter and exit. You can also use them inside of FastAPI dependencies with yield by using with or async with statements inside of the dependency function. Okay. So you have a context manager here, okay? And the first one has enter and this other one has exit, okay? So any function, any class of yours having these dunder methods, okay, is a context manager. And they have here a dependency called with my context manager as db yield db, okay? So they're saying another way to create a context manager is with context lib.context manager or context lib.async context manager. And we know what async helps us in this case, using them to decorate a function with a single yield. That's what FastAPI uses internally for dependencies with yield. So FastAPI does this for us internally with dependencies having yield. But you don't have to use the decorators for FastAPI dependencies. You shouldn't. Okay? So you don't have to use the decorators for FastAPI dependence. FastAPI will do it for you internally. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you. Okay, so we have studied a lot, guys, today. Okay? And we're finished with this. Okay? But the whole summary of this page is actually in the beginning. They're saying FastAPI supports dependencies that do some extra steps after finishing. To do this, you'll use yield instead of return and write the extra steps or the extra code after. Okay, as simple as that. So they say make sure to use yield one single time per dependency. That's a summary. Use it to be able to do extra steps after finishing. Use yield instead of return and use only one. Okay. And here they have an example of a database dependency. Okay. And where I had explained to you the order. If I can control Z here quickly. Okay, I can control Z very fast. Okay. So the response is created, yield is done, close, then sending a response. Okay. So like we see here, okay, they say only the code prior to and including the yield statement is executed before creating a response. Okay. So stuff is done before creating that response. They say the yielded the value is then injected into the path operations. Okay. what you've yielded is now given to the path operations and other dependencies. Okay. Then after that, after yielding, later then you can do some other extra steps like closing a database operation. Okay. So every time you have to do something extra like closing the database, a database operation, use yield. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for joining today's stream. It has been a long one. Here I'm seeing it showing 95 minutes. Wow, it's been long. Okay. So tomorrow I'll be starting on another exciting topic, which is security. Okay. So thank you all for joining today's stream. I hope you've had a good time of learning, just as I've done. And again, consistency matters, guys. It's what sets people apart. Okay. Be consistent. Let's be consistent and let's do this until the end. Have a good evening, morning, night, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Bye bye. Thank you, Anad Search and Linus, for being active and learning with me. I really appreciate.